Dr. George Lundberg, editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, appeared at a news conference recently to announce that the May 27 issue of JAMA would contain two major articles dealing with the assassination of President Kennedy. The first article was based on interviews with Dr. James J. Humes and Dr. J. Thornton Boswell, two of the three pathologists who performed the Kennedy autopsy at Bethesda National Naval Medical Center. The second article dealt with the statements of doctors who observed President Kennedy as he lay on an emergency room cart at Parkland Hospital in Dallas just minutes after he had been shot. As I read the two articles, my amazement grew. I began to mark the misrepresentations and factual errors. Many assertions presented as fact were contradicted by statements previously made under oath. I found that the article praised Drs. Humes and Boswell for their work and endorsed their autopsy findings. I found that the article portrayed both Humes and Boswell as competent pathologists who took charge of the autopsy and performed without any interference. I found the article attacked all who believed there was a conspiracy in the Kennedy killing. At his press conference, Dr. Lundberg said that conspiracy theorists were motivated by paranoia and profits. The JAMA articles had particular criticism for Oliver Stone's movie JFK. It may or may not be coincidental that Lundberg held his press conference on the very day videos of the Academy Award-winning movie went on sale nationwide. But the greatest criticism was reserved for Dr. Charles Crenshaw, who has recently written a book arguing that President Kennedy was fatally wounded from the front, not by shots from the Texas School Book Depository in back of the President. In 1963, Dr. Crenshaw was a surgery resident at Parkland Hospital. He was present in the emergency room and saw President Kennedy while he was being treated. Dr. Crenshaw described an entrance wound in the front of Kennedy's throat, evidence of a shot from the front.
The second wound?
The second wound was here in the throat, right above the necktie. It was a small opening, very small, 3 to 5 millimeters, about the size of your little finger.
Crenshaw also described a large wound in the back of the President's head, in the occipital region.
From here,
right,
through.
And taking out
the back, or the occipital part, the back of your head. This was gone, in our view, and that's the reason we could see the cerebellum.
In his book, Dr. Crenshaw located the exit wound in the occipital-parietal area in the back of the head. If Crenshaw is correct, President Kennedy was hit at least twice from the front, clear proof of a conspiracy. His Parkland colleagues attacked Crenshaw. Dr. Charles Baxter, who was also in the emergency room, said, "The only motive I can see is a desire for personal recognition and monetary gain." Dr. Malcolm Perry, who performed an emergency tracheostomy on Kennedy minutes after he was shot, said when he first read Crenshaw's book, he considered suing him, but soon came to feel sorry for Crenshaw. And Dr. Marion Jenkins, who was also in the emergency room, stated that Crenshaw was dead wrong in his conclusions. When I finished the two articles, I knew the distortions they contained had to be refuted, and so I began this video. The work has been done in haste and is not of the same technical level as a CBS special, but it is factual. Every assertion made here is taken either from Warren Commission documents, House Assassinations Committee documents, or from taped interviews with the persons identified. There is no material from books by so-called conspiracy buffs. As we begin our investigation, it should be emphasized that the confrontation here is not one between the doctors involved in this case and me. The confrontation is between what Drs. Humes, Boswell, Perry, Carrico, Jenkins, Baxter, and Lundberg have set forth as the truth in the JAMA article and what they have said in the past. The conflict is between the Lundberg article and the past statements of the principals involved. Dr. Lundberg and author Dennis Brio suggest that Dr. Crenshaw may not even have been present in the trauma room in Dallas to see Kennedy's body. Dr. Lundberg, who is described in one of the articles as, quote, a stickler for details, notes that Crenshaw is not mentioned in the Warren report. What Dr. Lundberg doesn't say is that Dr. Crenshaw is mentioned 8 times by 5 others in the emergency room. These references are in Volume 6 of the 26 volumes of Warren Commission hearings and exhibits. Did Lundberg check this or didn't he? What did the Dallas doctors see in the emergency room on Friday, November 22, 1963? Do their observations agree with the autopsy done hours later in Bethesda, or with the photographs of President Kennedy's body which are said to have been taken at that autopsy? The autopsy identified a small entrance wound in the back of President Kennedy's head and a large exit wound on the right side of his head. This showed that Kennedy was hit from the rear, with the exit wound in front of the alleged entrance wound. Photographs of the back of Kennedy's head show the same pattern: a small entrance wound in the back of the head and a large explosive wound in the right front, again said to be proof of a fatal shot from the rear. It should be noted that the autopsy findings and the photographs supposedly taken to document those findings do not agree. There is a 4-inch discrepancy between where Drs. Humes and Boswell located the entry wound and where the autopsy photos show it to be. Furthermore, the autopsy photos show the exit wound to be further forward than the autopsy report places it. These obvious discrepancies are not noted in the JAMA article, but are dealt with in the paper which accompanies this video. As we have seen, some of Dr. Crenshaw's Parkland colleagues have criticized him for asserting that there was a large exit wound in the back of Kennedy's head, indicating a shot from the front. What makes this shocking is the fact that within hours of the assassination, all 4 of his critics wrote descriptions of the wounds which support Dr. Crenshaw's. They too described a large wound in the back of Kennedy's head, not in the front. It is a documented fact that every statement made by these 4 men about the location of the head wound is in agreement with the same man they attacked in the JAMA article. Within hours of the time they finished working with President Kennedy's body, many of the Parkland doctors were asked to write reports of what they had done and seen. These reports, many of them handwritten, make up Warren Commission Exhibit 392 and are the first written accounts of JFK's wounds. Dr. Marion Jenkins, who now says Dr. Crenshaw is dead wrong about thinking Kennedy was shot from the front, wrote within hours of seeing Kennedy's body that there was a wound in the temporal occipital area in the back of the head. Compare this with Dr. Crenshaw's description. In 1977, Dr. Jenkins was interviewed again, this time by the staff of the House Assassinations Committee. Again, he said the wound was in the temporal occipital region. Compare this with Dr. Crenshaw's description. In 1988, Dr. Jenkins was asked to indicate for cameras where the large head wound was. Compare with Dr. Crenshaw's demonstration. Dr. Charles Carrico, under oath, told the Warren Commission the wound was in the back of Kennedy's head. Again, compare with Dr. Crenshaw's description. Dr. Carrico also made statements to the House Assassinations Committee. He again located the wound in the occipito-parietal area. And here is Dr. Crenshaw's description. And in 1988, Dr. Carrico too showed the cameras where the head wound was. And again, we compare with Dr. Crenshaw. Dr. Baxter, who says Crenshaw must have wanted publicity and money when he claimed Kennedy had a large exit wound in the back of the head, wrote within hours of seeing Kennedy's body, quote, "The right temporal and occipital bones were missing and the brain was lying on the table." Compare Baxter's location with Dr. Crenshaw's. Dr. Malcolm Perry contemplated suing Dr. Crenshaw, then came to feel sorry for him. Strange, since on November 22, 1963, the 2 men described Kennedy's wounds in identical fashion. Malcolm Perry, in his handwritten report, placed the head wound in, quote, "the right posterior cranium." And where did Dr. Crenshaw place the same wound? Before the Warren Commission, under oath, Perry placed the wound in the right occipito-parietal area. Compare again with Dr. Crenshaw. When the House Assassinations Committee interviewed Perry in 1977, he again placed the wound in the back of the head. Compare again with Dr. Crenshaw's statement. Dr. Crenshaw referred to the President's throat wound as an entrance wound.
Second wound was here in the throat, right above the necktie. It was a small opening, very small, 3 to 5 millimeters, about the size of your little finger.
Within 2 hours of tending President Kennedy's body, Dr. Perry was part of a press conference held in a classroom at Parkland Hospital. The transcript of this press conference exists. It is White House Transcript 1327C and is located in the LBJ Library in Austin, Texas. The transcript clearly shows that Dr. Perry 3 times at the press conference stated that the wound in the front of the throat was an entrance wound. Compare those statements with Dr. Crenshaw's. Other Dallas medical personnel who were in the Parkland emergency room have located the head wound they saw. Without exception, they placed the wound, as Dr. Crenshaw and his 4 detractors do, in the back of the head.
My impression was that there was a wound in this area of the head, right in this area. I can tell you that the wound was not here. There was no damage to the face that was visible.
It would be this portion of the head right here.
There was a massive wound at the back of his head.
It appears that Dr. Crenshaw's views, far from being orphans, have a lot of relatives. None of this is in the JAMA article. Did Dr. Lundberg, a, quote, stickler for detail, not bother to read the record of the men he quoted? For years, charges have been made that many military figures were present in the Bethesda morgue, and that some of these men influenced the events which took place there. In the JAMA article, Dr. Humes repeatedly insists that he, and only he, was in charge. Humes further states that there were few military men in the morgue and they had no influence on what happened there. But official records show that there were many military officials present, more admirals than just Berkeley, and sworn testimony indicates that these military figures played a significant role in what went on in the morgue. 2 FBI agents, James Siebert and Francis O'Neill, were present during the autopsy. In their report, filed after midnight, they noted the name of every person present in the morgue. The list seems to have a tinge of brass. As indicated, Berkeley was not the only high-ranking officer, and Admiral Galloway, by his own statement, remained in the morgue throughout the autopsy. At the trial of Clay Shaw in New Orleans in March 1969, Dr. Pierre Fink, who assisted Drs. Hume and Boswell in performing the autopsy, testified under oath about conditions in the morgue. Question: was Dr. Humes running the show? Dr. Fink: well, I heard Dr. Humes stating that he said, "Who is in charge here?" And I heard an Army general, I don't remember his name, stating, "I am." You must understand that in those circumstances there were military people with various ranks, and you have to coordinate the operation according to directions. Was this Army general a qualified pathologist? Dr. Fink: no. Question: was he a doctor? Dr. Fink: no, not to my knowledge. Question: can you give me his name, Colonel? Dr. Fink: no, I can't. I don't remember. Question: how many other military personnel were present in the autopsy room? Dr. Fink: the autopsy room was quite crowded. The room was crowded with military and civilian personnel. Question: Colonel, did you feel you had to take orders from this Army general who was there conducting the autopsy? Dr. Fink: no, because there were others. There were admirals. Question. There were admirals? Dr. Fink. Oh yes, there were admirals, and when you are a lieutenant colonel in the Army, you just follow orders. Question. Were any of the admirals or generals or any of the military in uniform in that autopsy room? Dr. Fink. Yes. One controversial aspect of the autopsy has always been the failure of the pathologist at Bethesda to dissect the president's throat or neck wounds. Dr. Fink also testified about this under oath. Question. Why did you not dissect the track of the bullet wound you saw at the time of the autopsy at the time you examined the body? Why? I ask you to answer that question. Dr. Fink. As I recall, I was told not to, but I don't remember by whom. Question. Can you give me the name of the general you said told Dr. Humes not to talk about the autopsy report? Dr. Fink. This was not a general. It was an admiral. Question. What was his name? Dr. Fink. Well, there were several people in charge. There were several admirals, and, as I recall, the Adjutant General of the Navy. Question. Do you have a name, Colonel? Dr. Fink. It was Admiral Kinney, Kinney, as I recall. Examination of the clothing of the victim is a standard part of a medico-legal autopsy. According to Dr. Fink, an officer denied his request to see President Kennedy's clothing. Because key dissections had not been done and all organs had not been examined, Dr. Fink did not wish to mark the box on the autopsy sheet which indicates a complete autopsy. An officer said it must be marked as a complete autopsy. And Dr. Humes apparently agreed. In November 1963, neither Dr. Humes nor Dr. Boswell was a forensic pathologist. Both were, of course, pathologists. In the JAMA interviews, both Humes and Boswell insist that they had done autopsies involving gunshot wounds prior to examining Kennedy's body. The record indicates otherwise. The House Assassinations Committee wrote he, meaning Humes, had not performed autopsies in death due to shooting previously. Neither had the other autopsy pathologists. So they were required to do an autopsy that, by experience and by the way our society is structured, is reserved for forensic pathologists. When he testified under oath before the Warren Commission, Dr. Humes was asked specifically if he had done gunshot wound autopsies before. As you can see, he did not answer the question. It has been alleged that President Kennedy's body, which was not placed in a body bag at Parkland Hospital, arrived at the morgue in a body bag, indicating that the body may have been intercepted between Dallas and Bethesda. Dr. Humes states categorically that there was no body bag. But Paul O'Connor, who was a medical technologist at Bethesda and who helped lift Kennedy's body out of the casket and onto the morgue table, has stated the body was in a body bag. O'Connor reported this to the House Assassinations Committee in 1978. Assistant photographer Floyd Reeby also remembered a body bag. This is what he said in a taped interview. Captain James Stover, who was head of the medical school at Bethesda and was Dr. Humes' commanding officer, also believed there was a body bag. Curiously, in the list of items received by the Secret Service after the autopsy, there is this. One receipt dated November 22, 1963 for bed sheet, surgical drapes, and shroud used to cover the body in transit. In a taped interview, Captain Stover said the shroud was probably the body bag. The autopsy report, which Dr. Lundberg finds so thorough, was examined by a 7-member panel of forensic pathologists at the request of the House Assassinations Committee in 1977. This panel found so many shortcomings in the works of Humes and Boswell that they cannot all be discussed in this video. A separate fact sheet discusses these flaws in the Bethesda autopsy. Part of Humes' autopsy report reads like a brief for the prosecution. Material which is clearly hearsay is included. In his handwritten second draft of the autopsy report, Dr. Humes wrote, quote, "3 shots were heard, and the President fell face downward to the floor of the vehicle," close quote. Later, he marked out "fell face downward to the floor of the vehicle" and inserted instead "fell forward." Humes was 1,200 miles away from the scene of the shooting. Why is this in the autopsy report? And did Kennedy fall forward when shot? All who have studied the Kennedy assassination know that a mystery surrounds the disposition of President Kennedy's brain. Both Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell think the brain was buried with Kennedy at Arlington. Boswell told Jama, "I believe it was buried with the body." Dr. Humes said, "I don't know, but I do know that I personally handed it over to Admiral Berkeley, and he told me that the family intended to bury it with the body. I believe Admiral Berkeley." Humes said Admiral Berkeley came to Bethesda and got all autopsy materials, including the brain. He told me the family wanted to inter the brain with the President's body. I don't know what happened to the brain, but I do know that Admiral Berkeley was an honorable man. But none of this makes any sense. President Kennedy was buried at Arlington on November 25th. 2 weeks later, on December 6th, Humes and Boswell supposedly performed a supplementary autopsy examination of the brain, which had been preserved in formalin. How could the brain, said to have been in Humes's hands in the morgue on December 6th, have been buried 2 weeks earlier with Kennedy's body? Either Boswell and Humes are wrong about the brain being buried with the body, or no supplementary autopsy was really done on December 6th, or the brain examined at the supplementary autopsy was not Kennedy's, or sometime after December 6th, someone opened JFK's grave at Arlington and inserted the brain. And what does this whole matter say about how carefully Dr. Lundberg, who, remember, is said to be a stickler for detail, really analyzed what Boswell and Humes told him before he gave it his wholehearted endorsement as the final word on this autopsy? A detailed examination of the errors and contradictions in the JAMA article is contained in a written report which accompanies this video. The conflict here is not between the doctors and me. The conflict is between the doctors and themselves, between what they say now and what they have said for the record. The JAMA article is superficial, error-filled, and intellectually dishonest. In my social studies classes, term papers are often required. I could not accept a high school term paper with the errors and contradictions contained in this article. In closing their 2 articles, Lundberg and Briot wrote, "This special report is our attempt to confront the defamers of the truth. Let the people consider this video and read the printed material which accompanies it, then decide who the defamers of the truth are."